All right, we're back, and in this segment, we're going to talk about some family-friendly benefits, family leave policies, child care benefits, elder care assistance, and then talk a little bit about dual earner couples. All right, let us start with family leave policies. So, in 1993, the Family and Medical Leave Act was signed into law for the United States that says you can take up to 12 weeks of job protected but unpaid leave. In 2020, the Washington State Paid Family Medical Leave Act became law. And actually, I clicked on that and I already had it open, but okay, whatever. If you're curious about the Washington State Paid Family and Medical Leave Act, you can go to paidleave.wa.gov. And it's a little bit confusing because they kind of buried, what would you be making if you were on this kind of pay? And so you scroll down, there's a little video telling you, 6 questions answered, so you can watch that. It tells you what qualifies, what kind of employee qualifies, what you can be doing with it, who can take it, how much you can take. And it turns out that you can take up to 18 weeks depending on what you're taking it for. So there's a list of things, how you can take it. You have to do at least 8 hours. And then here's where it got to finally what I was trying to find out, because it's paid for through the basically the unemployment. It's called the Employment Security Department in Washington State. And so it says when you take leave, you will receive up to 90% of your weekly pay, up to a maximum of $1,000 a week. So for high earners, they may not be getting 90% of their weekly pay. And depending on what you're taking the leave for, you might not get 90% of your pay. How many weeks you're taking, you might not get 90% of your weekly pay. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. It's not necessarily that you're going to earn exactly what you normally did during a month, but it's definitely more than zero. It's going to be more than zero, something to look at. And it's paid for by employees, like all of us who work for a salary or hourly wage are currently having deductions taken out of our paychecks to contribute to this program. And then certain employers are contributing to it too. Mostly employers who have more than 50 employees contribute to this fund that allows for this kind of paid family medical leave. So Washington State has something better than what the federal government mandates. And that's what a lot of states have. A lot of states have different kinds of family medical leave paid for, so that we don't at the national level have a dictate that you're going to earn a certain amount or whatever while you're off. But they found that about 40% of people who take family and medical leave end up cutting it shorter than they thought that they were going to be gone. And a lot of them report that they did that because they couldn't afford not to work. Others report that they cut it short because they were worried that, basically their job was going to forget about them and it was going to move on without them or something like that. And that's a really sincere concern that if, yes, I have, job protected unpaid leave, but while I was gone for 12 weeks, maybe my competitor at work has, been given my assignments, and it's possible that I'm going to feel a little insecure and I want to go back to work earlier than I thought I did. Now, in Europe, they call it parental leave usually. Hungary is a good example where they say employees can combine work and family responsibilities a lot more smoothly than the U.S. can. In Belgium, you can actually take a career break if you want, and you can sort of earn a basic salary and not work for a period of time. They report that most people take a brief break when they take a career break. They don't do months, but a lot of times we point to Europe and a lot of countries within Europe as examples of, trying for a work-life balance that is emphasizing life probably, whereas in the U.S. we emphasize work probably a little bit more than we should. I thought it would be interesting for you guys to look at this global map of paid maternity leave around the globe. And so you see in the pink countries like the US, Australia, Papua New Guinea, they have maternity leave, but it's unpaid. And remember, like I said, in the US it's unpaid, but there are country, what are they called, states that have paid medical leave. But as a nation, we have no mandated paid medical leave. In the blue states, or the blue countries, sorry, which there are a lot, so I won't name them all, the employer pays for the maternity leave. So the any amount of income that the mother takes when she takes maternity leave is coming from the employer. In the orange countries, it's a mix of Social Security or state assistance, and then the employer is contributing. So it's partly like socialized and partly capitalistic. In the green countries, and there's only a few, so you have to really look, you've got a mix of Social Security and then state social assistance. So it's all coming from either the national, it's a combination of the national government providing it plus their locality. In the red, they're getting paid through their Social Security system. And then in the yellow, which I see Kyrgyzstan, and then there's New Zealand. I think that covers the yellows. They have state social assistance. It's not their technical Social Security system. And then anything that's white, they just didn't provide any information for this study. So there's a lot of different ways that different countries around the world handle this issue of women taking time off for the birth or the adoption of a child. So lots of different ways that it's handled. So this graphic shows us paid child-related leave periods by duration at the full rate equivalent, it's called, of the leave period if paid at 100% of usual earnings and the remaining unpaid weeks. So what that's getting at is that you have a certain number of weeks that you're allowed off by the government, and then you have a certain amount of weeks that are paid at the 100% level. Now, it might be the case that across all those weeks you get some subset of your pay. So let's say you earn $30,000 a year. So you take, let's say you live in the United Kingdom and you take 52 weeks off. It shows that they pay you 100% of your salary for 12 weeks. It's possible that you could ask for it to be amortized so that you're actually getting 1/12 of your $30,000 income each month rather than all of it for 12 weeks and nothing for the remaining 40 weeks out of the year. You're entitled to a year off, but you only get 12 weeks worth of income during that time that you're off. So that's what this graph is showing us. So the blue part is how many weeks are paid at 100% level. And the red bar takes us, if it's taller, it's taking us up to how many weeks the person's entitled to have. So, so you go across and you see that, there are some countries, the entire bar is blue, and some countries it's partially blue, partially red. Sweden, it's entirely red. For some reason on this graphic, the United States, there's no bar. You see it over on the far right, there's no bar. It should be a 12-week bar that's red. So I'm not exactly sure why the United States doesn't have a bar. I looked for another graph that had it, but this was the best graph. I like how it was stacked and stuff, so that's why we're using it. But so it's important to note when people say, "Oh yeah, we get an entire year off after the birth of a child." It doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting it off and they're being paid. So that's important for people to know when they're hearing about what happens in other countries, because it may not be exactly what it sounds like. Let's take Canada, right? It's there in the sort of towards the middle left. You get 6 weeks paid. You're entitled to a total of, I think, 18 weeks, but only 6 weeks are paid. So same thing with Denmark. All right, so hopefully you had time to stare at it. If not, you can pause it. All right, let's go on to this. The thing is, a lot of U.S. companies offer far more than what they're required to do, right? The typical woman who gets paid during her maternity leave is being paid by her company. And so this is a little graphic showing us the companies the blue bar are, the average company in the US. The red bar are the 100 best companies to work for these kinds of benefits. So you've got 16% of US companies in general pay maternity leave. And typically it's 6 weeks. The 100 best companies pay a full 8 weeks. Now we move to the right and we see paternity leave. So dad getting time off for the birth of or adoption of a child. 15% of companies cover that. 83% of the best companies do. And usually you get 3 weeks for dad. Adoption for mom and for dad, adoption is different than mom giving birth. And so paid adoption, you see that there's a slightly lower rate for the 100 best than there was for maternity, because we're kind of averaging maternity and paternity and ending up with 87%. Other benefits to parents, we've got on-site lactation rooms. 100% of the best companies have that. 34% of the average companies do. Paid sick leave. 96% of the best companies do, and 34% of average companies do, which is kind of an interesting little statistic, right? That only 96% give paid sick leave. Adoption assistance. And that can be financial, it can be informational. That term assistance is kind of vague. Lactation support services, again, it could be informational. And then we have backup childcare. Like I mentioned before, a lot of times when you have a sick child, you might have to miss work and stay home with your sick child. And so 85% of the best companies in the US offer backup childcare, whereas only 4% of the average companies do. So US companies tend to offer more than the federal government requires them to do. Sorry, this is a little bit blurry. I apparently enlarged it too much. So here we have the percent of women who received paid leave before or after their first birth. Across the x-axis, we have years. So it goes as far back as 1961-65 and as recent as 2006-2008. So I don't have the newest data. And then you see the different colored bars. The lightest colored bar is women who have less than a high school diploma. The next darker is high school graduate. Next is some college. And then darkest purple is the bachelor's degree or higher. And so what is really important to note is the more education a woman has, the more likely she is to have paid time off for, before or after the birth of their first child. And it's getting, the disparity is getting larger as time goes on, right? Like back in 1961-65, it was about 16% of women, regardless of their education, who were getting paid time off. By 71-75, we're starting to get a little bit of a stair step where the more education you have, the more likely it is that you're paid for your time off. But by 2006-2008, we're getting into way beyond what we would say is a stair step. You're looking at the lowest income or lowest education levels, still hovering around 16%. And the highest education levels, we're looking at, 2/3 of women being offered paid maternity leave, whatever, that they can use for the birth of their first child or any child. Okay, so U.S. companies oftentimes offer more than they're required to. That is the basic premise here. I thought you guys might find this one interesting. How many weeks of paid leave do tech companies offer new dads? And how many weeks is what this is depicting, right? So it shows Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit offer 17 weeks. Yahoo offers 8 weeks for new dads. Google 7, Twitter 6, Pinterest and Microsoft 4. Of course, nobody is required to give paid time off to dads via federal mandate. So all of these are things that companies are doing because they're recognizing that dads want that time off and that time to bond with their child and to help their wives or whatever, their co-parents. And so companies are, in an effort to recruit the best employees, are offering things that employees want. All right, childcare benefits. Why would a company offer it? Well, you know what? We have 63.3% of moms in the workforce, either as a co-breadwinner, contributing equally with their spouses, or they are the sole breadwinners. Either their spouse stays home or they are the single parent. And so when you have 63% of the workforce, 63% of mothers in the workforce, you can imagine that companies might need to accommodate moms. So it's in their best interest to accommodate moms. Childcare difficulties can contribute to absenteeism, tardiness. I mentioned like if the school bus hasn't gotten here yet, I still have to wait with my child. Lower productivity as the parent is distracted. Having to leave work early because they have to deal with childcare issues. Coworkers' productivity and morale is oftentimes affected by these kinds of things as the coworkers have to pick up the slack. And maybe they start to feel resentful that the person with a child is putting the child before work. So one thing that companies have done, at least for the past about 35 years, is offered on-site childcare centers. It's a really popular feature, and for a lot of employees, it could be a recruitment tool or a retention tool for maybe an employee who's maybe I would leave, but gosh, I can't find a place that has a nice childcare center like this, right? It's usually seen as a positive for users, for parents who have children to drop off. But you got to imagine that this is like a time limited benefit for an employee. There's a really profound childcare need for about the first 5 years of a child's life. And then they start having school and they have other things. And so this might be an attractive benefit for employees who haven't yet had children and know that if they were to have children, that they would have this option to use. It might work for recruiting employees who have children that would need it. But for a lot of employees, this might not be a benefit that they're really that interested in. How about elder care assistance? Why? Well, at least 22 million U.S. households are providing care to their elderly relatives or to their elderly friends. It's predicted with the aging baby boomers that half of the workforce will be caregivers in the very near future. That, as their parents age, employees are going to have, this sandwich generation experience where they're in the middle of, their elderly parents and their own minor children. And it is a lot, to balance in life. So if the employer can help to reduce some of the stress, reduce some of the expense, provide anything that would help, it can actually contribute to employees being more devoted and things like that. 50% of employers offer some type of elder care services. The most common is, resource, and information. It's not, financial or, actual, objective help. But then they also might have dependent care accounts where you can actually put pre-tax dollars into an account and then you can use that money pre-tax to pay for expenses. Which, saves a little bit of money. That way you haven't had to give 20% or whatever to the government. They may host seminars for employees who are in this circumstance and might need information. They might provide counseling or sell long-term insurance for, it's called long-term care insurance for an elder who might need to be in an assisted living facility or something like that. The fastest growing benefit is geriatric care management, where employers are helping employees to, sort of manage the care of their elder parent. So this is probably going to become a lot more common in the near future as baby boomers are really moving into the elderly stage. Dual earner couples. So this illustrates the percent of married couples where both spouses are in the labor force. So the blue part is where both spouses are employed. The red is where one spouse is employed and the other one is not. And then the shady kind of pinky parts are where both spouses are unemployed. And you'll notice there's a lot more of that whenever there's recessions. And so my data ends in 2010. We should be getting new information from all this stuff after the 2020 census is over with. So the biggest advantage of having dual earner couples is that, of course, you make more money than if only one of you was doing it. But the biggest disadvantage is that usually one of the spouses effectively has a third job. So you each have one job. So that's two jobs between you. And then there's this third job called taking care of the household. And this data is from, again, 2010. And it's showing us the average minutes per day that men on the left and women on the right spent in household activities. And some of them have to do with childcare, right? Because you've got, let's see, where is our childcare? Actually, this doesn't have children on here at all. This is just household duties. So we got food and drink preparation at the bottom, which I got to tell you, during this pandemic, oh my gosh, if I have to feed myself one more time, so tired of it. I had no idea I ate out so much. Oh my gosh, I am so tired. So hopefully you guys are all nodding your heads, because it is shocking how sick you get of eating what's in the house. So food and drink preparation, you see that women do, a little bit more than twice of that than men. Interior cleaning, 3 times as much. Women are doing 4 times as much of the laundry. Household management, it looks like they're sort of in parity, 10 versus 13. Other household activities, which are undefined. So men are doing a teeny bit more than that, 1 minute more of that than women. Kitchen and food cleanup, well, it looks like women are doing most of that, almost 4 times as much of that. Lawn and garden and house plants, men are doing most of that. So, I'll call that almost 3 times as much of that. And then interior and exterior maintenance, repair, and decoration, men are doing, again, about 3 times as much as that as women. So there are certain categories that men on average are doing more of, and women on average are doing more of. But overall, women are doing more of that third job than men are on average. Now, I'm not talking about any of us in the room. I'm sure that all of us contribute 50%. We're all equal. But according to the average respondents, we're seeing that women are more likely to pick up that third job. Even though she's doing more, they both are doing things around the house in addition to what they do at work. And it can be draining. I mean, 1 hour and 27 minutes for men after, 9 hours, you work, let's say an 8-hour day. You're given your half hour or hour for lunch. You commuted your 30 or 45 minutes each way to and from work. And then you come home and you still have 1 hour and 27 minutes of work to do when you get home, or 2 hours and 11 minutes of work to do when you get home. And like I already mentioned, nothing about childcare is on here. So if this couple has children, add another 1.5 hours to this list, right? Because there's homework and baths and getting ready for bed and all the things that contribute to that. And so you can imagine having this third job can be quite taxing. So some of the research findings. Career satisfaction. The work-related variables predict career satisfaction much more than these household things do, these non-working related variables do. Really, it is about the job, whether the person is satisfied with their job or not. It turns out that those work-related variables are exactly the same for men and for women in determining career satisfaction. So it is about the job and whether it's meeting the employee's needs and all those other things that we talked about. Now, childcare arrangements are important to both men and to women. And so one of the things that will probably be a benefit of the future is that they will be offering childcare support to all employees, males and females. Men are asking for that more often than they used to. Men are asking for a better work-life balance than they used to. And so hopefully that's going to benefit everybody, right? That if everybody demands that, then it becomes something that employers offer. If only certain employees ask for it, then employers might just hire the ones who don't ask for it. So if everybody's asking for it, then it becomes a benefit that's offered. So there are 2 approaches to dual earning couples, and this is actually what can be a real source of stress for dual earning couples. There's the conventional couple where, in addition to her career, the female maintains primary responsibility for the home and for the children. And then there's the role sharing approach where both spouses actively pursue their careers and both actively are involved in the household upkeep and in parenting responsibilities. It turns out that women expecting a role-sharing marriage are more likely to be committed to a lifelong, time-consuming career, and they are more likely to have higher self-esteem. So women who, when they get married, are expecting that marriage to take that role sharing approach tend to be more committed to their careers. Women who are expecting the conventional approach tend to be less committed to their career, or are willing to take a break in their career, or things like that. Now, where you can get some conflict in dual learning couples is when you have a woman who's expecting role sharing married to a man who's expecting conventional. It doesn't tend to go the other direction. It's not as stressful if you have a woman who's expecting conventional who's married to a man who's expecting role sharing. That doesn't seem to produce as much stress as a woman who's expecting role sharing and marries somebody who's expecting conventional. So I always like to just recommend, discussing expectations before moving forward in any kind of long-term relationship, because that can be a big pan of cold water in your face when you discover that you've got different goals for how the household's going to run and how important each other's careers are, things like that. All right. What happens when we lose our job? Psychologically, that's going to be a stressor, isn't it? Losing your job. Because I'm saying job loss. I'm not saying that you are moving jobs and you did this voluntarily. I'm saying you had a job and then you were asked not to come to it anymore, right? Like it folded, coronavirus hit, there was a recession, or something happened and you no longer are going to be working there. First off, we have to think about, why are jobs important to us? And then we'll really understand the psychological effects of losing a job. Because obviously, income. So that's always going to be an issue. But having a job gives us purpose. I don't know how many of you might have a job and you were not able to go to it, maybe still aren't allowed to go to it yet, and how you might have felt a little bit lost. Even if it's a part-time job, you're like, well, it's part of my routine. This is what I do. I have a purpose. This is what I do. It may give us identity and prestige. Like maybe you're proud of where you work. Maybe you are sort of involved in your identification as a person who does this job for this company or organization. Right? It's part of why we try and pick organizations to work for that we're proud of working for, right? It gives structure to our day. There were so many memes during the pandemic about, okay, it's time to change out of your daytime pajamas and into your nighttime pajamas, right? Because we're sort of sitting around and we're just binging on Netflix. There was nothing to do. And, that's one of those psychological effects that we experience. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? All of a sudden people were like gardening and stuff, trying to find something to structure their day around. It gives us social interactions outside the family, which has been a problem with this pandemic, hasn't it? Is that, if I have to have the same conversation with the people who live under my roof, right? It's stressful getting to go out and see other people. And of course, getting to use your job skills, especially those of us who have trained and, have finally got them and got a job that was finally, designed to use them. Or maybe at work, we had been really working on our job skills. We'd been really improving something, and now we lost that opportunity, right? So these are the things that we get from working. So when we lose our job, obviously, we lose these things, right? And it makes us founder around a little bit. So when we lose our jobs, we lose these things, and that is stressful. All right, I've just pulled this nice new graphic because I thought, well, you guys might not be as interested in the job losses of the Great Recession as you might be, with the job losses right now. And you see that the job losses that we had just in the month of March are, almost as deep as the worst months of the Great Recession of 2008 and 9. The good news I would just like to point out, and part of why I wanted to make sure you could see the recession on this graphic, is, the economy goes up and the economy goes down, but it definitely, it recovers. And so as we all sit here scared, wondering what's going to happen next, I'm just going to look at the past behaviors and say that more than likely it's going to do what it's done in the past, and we're going to recover and it's going to come back. And so, this too shall pass, I hope. We're one day out of this, isolation and then the economic stress that we're under and things like that. So job loss is so I wanted to give you the overall picture and see this up and down. And then I wanted to talk about job loss in organizations. Really, U.S. organizations have been reducing the size of their workforces since the 1980s. As we've gotten, more automation and other kinds of things. Like I mentioned before, salaries are the most expensive line item for any organization. And so when they're trying to cut costs, the easiest thing to do is reduce the size of their workforce. It's called a mass layoff if at least 50 employees are dismissed from their job. And so if one company releases at least 50 employees, that's called a mass layoff. So in the Great Recession, we were having nothing but just, every company was doing mass layoffs. And, obviously during the pandemic, when everything was shut, everybody was laid off. A lot of employees knew that layoff was temporary. Their company said, don't worry, we are coming back. And when we come back, you're coming back. So that had to have eased some of the concern a little bit for those employees who got that message. But some jobs are gone. Some businesses have closed and those jobs are gone. And now you have employees who are going to have to try and figure out what to do next. And it's a mass layoff, which means there are a lot of people who are going to be looking for what to do next. In general, even before the coronavirus hit, even when things were looking good, U.S. workers express a lot of anxiety about job loss. They are, it was only 10 years ago the last time we had mass layoffs. And so people are still carrying around with them this anxiety that, I always like to use the phrase fat, dumb, and happy, right? I got my job, things are going fine, but there's in the back of their mind, the possibility that this could all just drop out from underneath them. And so that anxiety contributes to stress and can actually lower job satisfaction and all those things we've been talking about. So some of the research on job loss. So an unemployed person's perceptions of time use and their perceptions of negative life events contribute to depressive symptoms. So if the person is really feeling like their time is, not being used well, that they are just watching TV and can't get off the couch and whatever, and they're really ruminating on the negative life events, that can really contribute to depression, which then leads to more negative behaviors. So if a person can distance themselves from the job loss and not look at it like I got fired and I'm a loser and it's never going to get better and like that, if they instead can distance themselves, they're going to be less distressed when they do lose their job, and they're going to be more likely to get reemployed. A lot of times when we have economic dips, we have people who are chronically unemployed afterwards, and it takes them months, if not years, to find a new job. And part of that happens because they get all enveloped in the negativity associated with the job loss, and then the fact that they're not finding a new job, and they don't realize that part of why they're not finding a new job is because they're experiencing so much distress about job loss, and then now their unemployed situation, that they're actually putting out an energy that makes them less employable. So employees who can kind of recast it and really distance themselves from the job loss tend to do better. Now, what about when there's a mass layoff and a little small subset of employees is kept? We call those layoff survivors. They made it through the mass layoff. They tend to be productive. They tend to be less productive, and they tend to be less trusting, and they tend to be more anxious and more angry. You might think that they'd be super grateful and they'd be working really hard so that the company doesn't lay them off too, but they're walking around on pins and needles waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so they're angry, they're mad that their coworkers got fired, they're, and then they've got all this anxiety because maybe they will be next, but they kind of are mad, so they don't want to be really productive. And so it's not what a lot of people would think. It's really a very negative thing to be the layoff survivor. So you overall get low morale among the survivors and low job satisfaction. A lot of times being a layoff survivor means that you get to pick up work that 2 or 3 other people had been doing. So now they feel overworked. They feel like they've lost some of their support system because those people got laid off. They don't trust their supervisors to tell them the truth because maybe they didn't see that layoff coming. And so altogether, the survivors are usually very unhappy. So the effect of job loss, bringing us back to war's environmental determinants. So let's see how job loss could undermine a person's satisfaction with life and things like that, right? Opportunity for personal control. If you got let go and it wasn't really about anything you did, there was nothing you could have done, you've sort of lost that opportunity for personal control, right? You've lost your opportunity for skill use. You're losing some of the variety in your day where you used to go to work, plus got to see your friends and plus all those things, right? Environmental clarity. You're not really sure what's going on in your environment. You've lost that valued social position that had been part of work. You don't have those externally generated goals anymore. You've lost your income. Maybe you don't feel physically secure anymore because, a few more weeks and you're supposed to pay rent and you don't have an income. You've lost your supportive supervisor. And you've lost that opportunity for interpersonal contact. So you can imagine that job loss is like the antithesis of all the things that war says that a good and effective, employment situation can give us. All right, so let's wrap up with a really positive note. Workplace violence. Sorry, it looks blurry to me again too. I must have blown it up too high. So here we have fatal occupational injuries by major event 2016 to 17. And you see that by far the most common fatal occupational injury is transportation incidents, traffic accidents. Then it slips, falls, and trips. And it's interesting, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they distinguish between falls on the same floor. So like you fell right here, and then falls where you went from one level to another level. So you fell off a balcony, or you fell during construction from, the second floor to the first floor. So they're very detailed. So most common causes of death are transportation, falls, slips, and trips. And then we have third, violence and other injuries by persons or animals. So not all of this is what you might think of when you think of workplace violence, because it does include other injuries by persons or animals. So apparently, if you work with animals, apparently sometimes they kill you. This is horrible. So you can see our little list. Let's talk about workplace violence. What are some of the risk factors for being assaulted or the victim of violence at work? Having contact with the public, right? Having people you don't know coming into your space, whether it's your store or your car or whatever. Having contact with the public, because they can be very unpredictable and they can be harmful. You don't know them, stuff like that. Being involved in the exchange of money, because the person might want the money, so they may assault you and take it. Delivering passengers goods or services, because now you have left a potentially safe place and gone out to deliver things, and you meet up with strangers, or you carry strangers to a destination, right? So you can imagine that when you go out into the unknown, that's going to be riskier. Having a mobile workplace. So, delivering services oftentimes is stuff like going to a place, a person's house and grooming their dog, something like that. Or driving a taxi cab or a police cruiser or an Uber car or something like that. Working with unstable persons. So, you can imagine in some healthcare settings, being in social services or being a social worker, working in criminal justice settings, you're going to be at a higher risk of coming in contact with people who have aggressive tendencies. And then working alone or in really small numbers, right? The person who works overnight at the convenience store, that's risky, right? Or working in a situation where it's, you and one other person and, you're out someplace else, or you're in you work in a neighborhood where there aren't very many other stores open when yours is open. When my daughter used to work downtown Seattle in Queen Anne, she worked for a business that was in a neighborhood of apartment complexes, and I don't know, she didn't not other businesses. And so here she was, a very young adult, and it was technically a business, but there was really no need for street, foot traffic to come into this place of employment. She was there working as an accountant or whatever. And when I went down to visit her at her place of employment, I was like, this seems a little unsafe for you to be in here by yourself, or sometimes there's one other woman in here with you. A lot of the time she was there literally by herself. I'm going through my little risk factors for being assaulted at work. And she said she did keep the front door closed quite frequently, like locked, but alone or in small numbers, that's like the riskiest thing you can do, right? Going out to someplace else, risky. So the models of workplace violence, so O'Leary, Kelly, Griffin, and Glue said there are organization-motivated aggressions, and then there are organization-motivated violence. So aggression would be attempts to cause injury or be destructive as a result of some organizational factor. So under aggression, it includes like harm of some sort, whereas motivated, the violence is negative effects on people or property that result from aggression. So when we have rigid, punitive, aggressive organizations, they may actually encourage employee aggression. And a lot of times the more an organization is trying to quell aggression, the more rigid, punitive, and aggressive the organization itself becomes, trying to get the employees not to behave aggressively, right? So it actually is eliciting aggression in their efforts to reduce aggression. So aggression is where we have these attempts to cause injury or be destructive, whereas violence is where you actually are harming the property or the people. Now, Martinko and Zellers did a literature review, and they found that high levels of frustrating events tend to lead to greater incidence of aggression and violence. There's a whole model of aggression that says that when we get frustrated, we're more likely to behave aggressively. So violent or aggressive employees, oftentimes you discover that they were rewarded in the past for behaving in violent or aggressive ways. It could be overt reward where they like got money after they assaulted someone. It could be instead, sort of indirect reward where maybe they got status because they were aggressive and they won or whatever. They often also report that they had poor role models. So there are people who in their past have behaved in aggressive ways, and this employee saw that they got what they wanted by being aggressive, and now the employee thinks that's the way to act. A high external locus of control is associated with aggressive or violent behavior more often than a high internal locus of control. So locus of control is referring to whether you think you're in control of your outcomes or if something else is in control of your outcomes. So a person who's high in their external locus of control means that they think something outside themselves is what determines their outcomes. And it could be, God or luck, or it could be the man that determines their outcomes. And so if you really believe that you're not in control of your own outcomes, you can imagine that kind of frustration could lead to aggression or violence. Males are considerably more likely than females to be aggressive and violent in the workplace. Females are more likely to be aggressive, verbally, where they spread rumors or speak maliciously behind somebody's back. Males are more likely to do the kinds of aggression and violence that we're talking about here. Some of the tentative findings that Martinko and Zellers offered were that a series of minor frustrations at work may serve as a trigger for aggression, that they sort of accumulate. And so it's not like the aggressive person has one frustration in March, another frustration in July, and it doesn't really matter. For them, it's a cumulative thing, and they're like, oh, here it happens again. I'm being frustrated again. I'm being frustrated again. And they're sort of like taking score. Individuals high in negative affectivity are more likely to respond to aversive outcomes with aggression. So negative affectivity are people who are tend to have a lot of negative emotions. And so if they already have this tendency towards negative emotions, they're more likely to respond to frustration or aversive outcomes with aggression. And then impulsive individuals are more likely to react to aversive outcomes in violent ways. So if you have a person who oftentimes behaves impulsively, right? It could be benign kinds of impulsive acts, like they went in to buy a Monster at the convenience store and then they go, you know what, I will buy that $5 lottery ticket. Like that's an impulsive act. A person who does impulsive things in general are more likely to react impulsively in lots of situations, including given the proper frustration, given the proper aversive, outcomes, they could behave in an aggressive or violent way. So those are their tentative findings. They kind of think that this might be a basic model for what leads to workplace aggression. All right. They also developed a few propositions. Some aggressive behaviors, the person is in the middle of the aggressive behavior without even having been aware of what they were doing. Like they didn't plan it out. They just reacted. Individuals who are emotionally susceptible are more likely to perceive workplace incidents as trigger events. So people who are already, sort of on the edge, ready to snap, are more likely to see what might be a neutral workplace incident as a trigger, something that deserves a violent response or an aggressive response. In ambiguous situations, perpetrators may attribute negative outcomes to a general cause such as management. So when something bad happens and it really isn't clear why it happened, people who are more likely to behave aggressively are the kinds of people who will say, well, management was in control of this. Management made this happen. Management's setting us up, something like that. All right. So that concludes our models of workplace violence, and that concludes chapter 11. So I will see you guys back for chapter 12.